Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have Alex Langshur, join us. So, Alex, welcome.
Hey, Michael, I'm pleased to be here.
So you are currently lead Dentsu's global kind of Google technology practice. Formerly, you were the founder and co-CEO of Cardinal Path. You're the past president of the Digital Analytics Association. You've taught digital marketing and analytics at the University of British Columbia. You've been retained by Google to train and coach others in the kind of agency management space. And then you worked with many well-known large organizations, Amgen, Bridgestone, Cisco, and a whole bunch of others. So I'm really excited to dive into your story of how you got to where you are, how you built up Cardinal Path, how it was ultimately acquired, and then what you're doing today. So I think we can learn a lot from your journey to this point so far. So why don't we start off? Before you even got into the world of kind of data and analytics, you were actually looking for gold. Can you talk about that for a minute and kind of how you got to that place? And then I'd love to transition to figure out how you got from looking for gold to digging in data and analytics.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I did so I grew up in Montreal, and I've always been somebody that enjoyed science and the outdoors, and geology as a profession seemed to be the perfect marriage of science and the outdoors. So most sciences came super easily for me, but the only subjects that I had to actually study for was math. So I wanted to avoid as much math as possible because I was lazy. And there wasn't a tremendous amount of math in in geology, just a little bit of stats. So I did that, and I graduated, moved north to Northern Canada to look for gold. And I did that for, I think 7 years. I was very fortunate. I got promoted pretty quickly. And all my peers basically said, you're young, get out, because it's a hard life to be a geologist. You're away from family for a long time. And so I heeded their advice, and I recycled myself into a different career.
When you say that you got promoted, why was that? What do you think you were doing that caused you to be promoted?
Oh, well, that's a fantastic question, actually. It's the first time I've ever been asked that question. So it was an industry that at the time was, you paid your dues. And it was like you were a geologist, then you were a junior geologist, then you were a project geologist, then you were a senior geologist, just kind of went up and up and up and up until you reached the level of, director of exploration. And I got to be the level of director of exploration for Eastern Canada for a company called Black Minerals. And I was 28 years old. Wow. And the reason I believe that it happened was because I had this innate ability, which I didn't realize at the time, but I've since come to realize that, and it's one of my superpowers, and that is I can explain complicated concepts relatively easily using metaphor. And so when it came time to selling, because what happens in that industry is you all would have projects, and you're all trying to vie for the funding so that you can do the exploration on your project. So what I used to do was I used to present my projects, and the way I would present them would make people feel, my gosh, there's a mine there. We got to fund Alex's projects. And so, as a result, I had a lot of work going on. We had some discoveries, and I think that's what led to it. So it was mostly because I was able to really communicate my ideas in a way that people understood, and it made them think that, I knew what I was talking about.
You mentioned it's a tough business or kind of tough line of work. You got recommendations or suggestions to get out while you were still, relatively young at that time. Is there anything that when you kind of look back at those days, I have the image of it might be cold, or it might be hot, or it's, there's bears out there. Just it's a tough environment, tough kind of line of work. Is there anything that you think helped you or that you learned during that time that as you were growing and building multiple businesses that gave you an advantage or an edge from a mindset perspective, or a work or a discipline or commitment, or kind of anything resonate for you?
Oh yeah, so that, again, fantastic question. So just as a sidebar, you're not going to see a bear because they smell you and they're going to get out of the way. You're not going to see them, they're smelling. But you know what? The mosquitoes and the black flies and the deer flies and the horse flies, They are terrible. So I was much more scared of them, or just like them much more. Look, what I think it was is a couple of things. Number one is you are spending your day collecting data. When you're in the woods, you're hammering rocks and you're looking at the rocks and you're identifying what type of rock it is and what type of structural impacts have happened over the rock and what type of alteration. Then you come back at the end of your day, the pack sack full of rocks, and you plot where you were and what type of rocks. And then you kind of assemble your data, you send some off for analysis. So you can actually look at the mineral composition of them, and et cetera. So basically what we're doing is we're playing with large data sets. And so one of the things that got me into, I'll share with you this, is that Steve Jobs, when he was giving the commencement speech at a college, he said, you know what, you can never connect the dots looking forward. You can only like look back and go, oh, okay, I see how that all connects together. And so this is one of those stories, right? Is that I'm dealing with data sets. I have to be really self-driven, because when you're in the woods alone.
Yeah.
The weather might be terrible, the black flies might be awful, you've got to walk through swamps, so you've really got to have that internal drive, because you might just want to say, oh, I'll just put my pack sack here and say I didn't find any outcrops, but then you won't find a mine, right? Because unless you do the work, you won't find the mine.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of that involved. And so self-drive that was there, ability to be critical with the data that I was looking at, i.e. the rocks I was collecting, I should take that, not that, because you can only have so many rocks in your backpack because it gets too heavy. The ability to kind of, as I said before, present my ideas and synthesize large volumes of data sets. So I think all that really helped for the analytics space. From an entrepreneurial perspective, again, selling your ideas and also knowing where do I need to spend my money? So the thinking that I always had was, you don't find mines at the surface anymore. Those mines have all been found. You find mines underground. The only way you can get underground is you have to drill. So if you have a budget, my thinking was you had to put at least 80% of that budget towards drilling. If you didn't do that, then you weren't going to find a mine. So the discipline around the business side of it too, which is how do I use my budget to its most effect? And I was super disciplined about that. So I think that all helped.
Yeah, no, I find that fascinating. I mean, for me, I think I took a lot from playing a lot of sports when I was young into the world of business, and just that drive and kind of commitment and dedication to ensuring that you don't give up, you keep going. It sounds like you had a lot of that as well. So
well, I'll just add one more thing, okay?
Sure,
that's I think really important, is that people would say to me, and I know this is going to come out sounding all wrong. I've been living in the States, so I'm a little bit more comfortable saying these things, but people would say to me, hey, Alex, you're a really good geologist, and man, you're a good geologist. And I would say, you know what? I don't want to be a good geologist. I want to be a lucky geologist, because lucky geologists find mines, right? So there's a lot of good geologists who never find a mine. I want to be a lucky geologist. And so, the other thing too is that business and entrepreneurship is a tremendous amount of work, right? That's not, you got to, as I say to my kids, you got to do the work to get to the train station. But then there's going to be trains of opportunity that come in. So now, which train do I get on? I'm not really sure. That's where the luck comes in. You got to get yourself to the station so that you can get on the lucky train, because some trains don't land at the destination you want them to. And that's just luck, some trains do.
So this is not a question that I had thought about before, but since you're bringing this up, in your experience, on that point specifically, is there anything that you now do from a filtering decision-making process that you have found has helped you to decide like which train to get onto? Because you can't get on all of them, as you mentioned. Some are more likely to lead to a positive, impact or the result that you want. Is there anything that you do when you're kind of weighing your options that is just helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one is that, it's the who. Who else is on that train? And like I learned a long time ago, like every Hewlett needs their Packard, every Lennon needs a McCartney, every every Jobs needs their Allen kind of thing, or Wozniak. But there's this aspect about teamwork that's super important. And so the people that are going to be on your team, who else is going to be on that train, is critical. And let's take that another step further. I would say 3 B players might equal 1 A player. Probably it's more like somewhere between 3 and 4 equals 1 A player. So it's not just that you have people, but you've got the right people, right? So that are mission aligned to you, that have the same kind of values and vision that you have. And at Cardinal Path, when John Hossack, who's just a great friend and who I knew in the industry, when he approached me and said, "Hey, look, I got this crazy idea about doing a roll up and da, da. You know what?" I said, "Well, who else is on? Who I was talking to?" And he named the other people. I went, "Oh, those are good people." Right. So I realized here was a train of opportunity. Like I'd done the work to become known in the industry so that, I had these connections. And then he was telling me who's going to be on that train. Absolutely, I'm going to be on that train.
Right. So you talk about, 3 or 4 B players equaling 1 A player. And I think this is such an important concept for everyone listening who has a team or is thinking about building a team. Have you found, is it possible to, let's say, take a B player and support them or work with them so that they can become an A player? Or have you found that if somebody is a B player, they're a B player for a reason, and that there's some kind of limiting factor that's just going to hold them back unless they really make a change internally themselves? Like, is that something that you can support from them being a B player to get to being an A player?
Yeah, so I'll say to you that it's probably more about me, that I have been not terribly successful in that, converting people from B to A. But I think that it is possible for people to become A players. There's a couple of conditions that are required. So the first condition is that they've got to feel that, the trust. They've got to feel supported. So secure. They've got to feel supported. They've got to feel significant. In other words, you put responsibility on them. If somebody isn't willing to assume the mantle of responsibility and run with it, they'll never be an A player, right? So if you give them the challenge, smart people will rise to that challenge. Smart people will figure it out. And I mean, sorry, and I shouldn't say smart people because I think most people are smart, but people that have that, as we'd say, the je ne sais quoi, like the grit to say, okay, I want to do this. They'll get switched on by that. People that aren't ready to be part of the A team, what they'll do is they see that challenge, and it's not that it's in the too hard bucket, but they might just not want to do it, right? They're willing to work hard, but they don't want that other thing. And when I talk about A player, it's not just that you can do a ton of work. It's that I can give you the parameters of what needs to be done. I can tell you what the target that we're trying to reach is, and you'll figure out the rest. So I don't need to really do much more than just make sure that you've got, support, you've got resources, you've got funding, you've got direction. I give you air cover. I create the conditions for your success. So, that's on you as a leader. You've got to create the conditions for those people to be successful. If you're not prepared to do that, they'll never become an A player. And then it's, the other part about it is that it's on you to kind of recognize if the experiment isn't working out. And I would say to you that as I got more seasoned, I began to realize that it's actually an act of kindness to take somebody who probably won't be an A player out of the position where they're going to feel that they're overwhelmed, or that they're not delivering, or that they're losing your trust, or any of those things, right? So we often make the mistake of like, this person did this really well, let's promote them. And I'll go back to my geology experience. The only path for progression in your career as a geologist was into the management track. Right. So if you are a fantastic geologist, great with the science, really good with the ideation, really good with the data analysis, really good with coming up with ideas and explaining the science behind it and figuring out, if you're great and you found something or you did something great, the only way you could be promoted really was into management.
Right.
And so they would get promoted into management where they had absolutely no training, no inclination, no desire, and they were disastrous. And the impact on the organization from a demotivation perspective of somebody who doesn't want to be there, but is being put there because that's the only way they can get promoted, is terrible. So you have to recognize that some people are just, they can be an A player, but maybe not within a team environment. They might have to be an individual contributor. So again, that's on you to figure out what is going to unleash somebody's superpowers. And then there are those people that are just never going to be, but they're going to be solid B players and making stuff happen. And you need those too. You need those too.
Great advice. So let's transition now to Cardinal Path, which you started in 2011 after kind of, as you said, rolling up or bringing a few different companies together. So a previous company that you had started. At that time, you were a co-CEO. And I'd like to better understand that dynamic. When you have two people that are driving the business forward, did that work well? Any lessons learned? Any advice that you would offer to somebody that has a partner? I don't know if you were kind of equal ownership shares or not, but just how do you make that work? Any advice on how, if you have kind of a co-CEO or two partners running a business, what did you learn during that time?
So I'm going to explain. That's another great question. So I'm going to explain. So when we rolled up Cardinal Path, there were 5 partners, not equal, but there were 5 partners. And we all assumed the title of senior partner, and we all assumed a role of kind of, everybody could voice their opinion. But once we made a decision, you had to disagree and commit. Right. So if you disagreed, that's fine, but you had to commit. If you weren't going to be able to commit, then, that was going to be an issue. So, and all I can say is I went from being the guy in charge of Public Insight, who made all the decisions, to being a partner amongst 5, one of 5. And the immediate sense that I had was massive relief, like massive relief, because suddenly all the burdens that you have, hiring, promoting, finding clients, figuring out pricing, doing contracts, doing marketing, following up on sales, just like dealing with your technology partners and, all that stuff. Now I was able to distribute that and actually have conversations at my level with partners. And it was enormously wonderful for like just lifting a weight off my shoulder. So that's number one. And then at some point in time, we realized that we because of a number of different changes in the business, we went to a co-CEO model. And initially, I was somewhat skeptical it would work. So I sat down with my co-CEO and we had a really, really honest conversation, right? Super duper honest conversation about how we're going to make this work. And, the thing about being a CEO is that you can delegate a lot of things, but you can't delegate the position, title, and role that a CEO has in a company, right? Like you can't delegate the leadership dimension behind that, the way that people look up to you. So we divided the tasks. I said, okay, you're going to do that, and I'm going to take care of this, but we are going to do this together. We're both going to be responsible for culture. We're both going to be responsible for kind of pushing the name out into the world. We're both going to be responsible for our relationship to our parent company. So we had some things we were both responsible for, and then things that we divided, and it worked super duper well. Why? Because I'd had 5 years to build a level of trust with Corey, and he and I, it's one of the absolute most I would say one of my proudest professional achievements of my professional career, is that we made that relationship work extremely well. And, we disagreed. Like, it's not to say that it was all shits and it was all smiles and giggles, but we disagreed. But those disagreements made the decisions better.
I want to ask you about your clients. I mean, today and even the later years of kind of Cardinal Path before the acquisition, you work with larger clients. When you started off, probably, I'm guessing, a group of smaller clients as well, and you kind of built up. When you look at the differences between what you did as a company to land, let's say, smaller clients compared to larger clients, and I'm asking this question for the consultants that are joining in with us right now, who might have some smaller clients, but they want to move up. They want to land higher value, bigger dollar clients. Any advice that you could offer? Any principles or just approaches or ways that you all conducted business that you found was really essential or critical to be able to land and service those larger clients?
Yeah, so that was an extremely deliberate decision that we made, right? What we recognized is that, one larger client would power growth in the organization because we could start to devote a resources to it in a consistent way. We recognized that having a larger client became a proof point for us to accrete other larger clients. We understood that the structures of the company, from sales and marketing through delivery and operations, right down to finance and billing and invoicing and legal, all those things needed to shift to deal with a larger company. I mean, just to give you an idea, once you start working with some of these larger enterprises, I mean, we've had some of them that have asked for 180-day net. So you issue the invoice, and then 180 days later, they're going to issue their payment, which is going to come to you like what, 5 to 15 days later after that. So, you kind of look at that and you kind of go, well, that's kind of weird. So you have to have the financial wherewithal to be able to deal with that. Plus, if you're going up that market, they're going to ask for financial guarantees. They're going to ask for insurance guarantees. They're going to want to be able to inspect your timesheets. So you're going to have systems of record that can be opened. They're going to have, there's all kinds of stuff that they're going to ask for.
Right.
So you have to be operationally ready to deal with that. It wasn't the easiest transition, but I will say this, is that we made conscious decisions about how we're going to do that. So we beefed up and built the client service team. We beefed up and bought an ERP system that enabled us to go from CRM right through to billing, because we sell services in the United States and Canada, some in Europe. In Canada, there's different taxation regimes. Right. In the US, there's different taxation regimes. There's nexus issues from that. So we wanted to have all of that standardized on a platform to enable us to scale. And just to give you an idea, in 2013, we made the decision to buy NetSuite as our enterprise planning system that went, as I said, from CRM, like the first opportunity, right through to the bill going out, and time tracking and project management and everything in between. Track So we decided to, in 2013, buy NetSuite as an enterprise resource planning software, which was a massive investment for us. It represented something like 30% of our year revenues to purchase that, if not a little bit more. By the time it was all finished, it was definitely more. But we could never have scaled the business without it. Would not have been possible. The other thing was that, and this is where luck comes in, right? Is we had very early on decided that a Google bet was a good bet. And so we immediately jumped on the Google bandwagon hard. And why that was important was because it was a bit of a cottage industry around, particularly Google Analytics at the time, but we were one of the largest, if not the largest GA supplier that there was around. So it enabled us to make that statement, and which became a proof point for getting into called into RFPs. And it's the first, like we used to say, 3 for show, the rest for dough. So we agreed that we'd really go down on our margin, never zero, we'd never go negative, never zero, but really go down that margin in order to land a marquee client. And with a clear expectation that we're going to turn case studies and do marketing materials around the fact that we land that marquee client, because they're the ones that then enable you to go into others and you can point to them.
And when you say that you're willing to really bring the margin down, was that through discounting, like a lower fee, or was that you just staff up even more? Or what do you mean when you say that you're willing to go down on the margin there for that client?
So what we were going to do is deliver a level of service which was not commensurate with the budget of the project. Right. So if let's say if you're shooting for a margin of 35-40% on your service business, we might go down to 5%.
Right. Okay.
Which meant that we could overinvest in that client.
Got you.
Right.
So I have a few questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Go on. No, you.
So I mean, everything you're sharing here, this is fantastic, and I think very valuable. You talk about terms that some of these larger companies and clients would say, net 180. How did you deal with that? And for those who might be kind of confronted with something similar, what have you found as a good way to push back on that, to not necessarily accept that, or in your experience, do you have to accept that if you want to win the business?
So there are some companies that do, right? And I think the very first message here is that procurement is never your friend. And when you start dealing with large organizations, you're going to be starting to deal with procurement. And procurement has one goal, and that is to drive down the cost of the services and products that they buy. And the other thing they have to remember about procurement is that they never have to stick around for the impact of their decisions. So they can go for the lower cost provider and they don't have to worry about it because their they said, hey, we saved 12% on this from last year. And your client is the one that's unhappy because, now you're into these difficult conversations where they're saying, well, I want you to do this, and saying, yeah, but I want to say yes, but I can't because, you didn't pay for that. The budget doesn't count for that. So, it sets up a bad dynamic. As a general rule, whenever we were presented with terms which we consider to be, usurious, we would just say no. But you would say, no, we can't accept that, but here's what we can accept. So the typical one, like I've seen 180, those are rare. I've seen 120, less rare. I see a ton of 90.
90, yeah.
Right. So whenever I see 90, my default is to go to 45. My default is to go to 45. And the other thing that a lot of procurement will do is they'll say, well, we'll pay in 30 if you give us a 2% discount. Right. So, that's a bad deal, by the way. So the thing is that you have to have the cash reserves, A, B, and so cash flow is king. Secondly is we did this thing where upon contract signing, like the ink is dry, or the DocuSign ink is dry, as it were, and we issue the first invoice because we're delivering services. So we do pre-bill.
Yeah.
So by the time, if you then take the other way of post bill, you deliver services for 30 days, you issue the invoice, it goes out maybe on the 40th day, and then they have 45. So you're basically 90 day there already. If you issue the first invoice up front and you structure the contract to say that, well, then you're going to get paid. If it's 90 days, you get paid 2 months down the road, which is about the same.
Right.
Yeah. So there's ways of approaching that problem set. And if it's at 45 days and you do pre-bill, you're ahead of the game, actually.
Right. How did you deal with kind of client concentration risk as you started going from smaller clients to larger clients? Some companies kind of face this challenging place where they take on this large client, they're excited about the win, but now that's 50% or even 60 or 70% of their overall revenue. And if something changes inside of that client or the engagement, they're in trouble. How did you navigate that? How do you kind of think about that, plan for that? Or what was your experience with kind of client concentration?
Well, look, so when I was running Public Insight in 2000, and I think it was 2005, 2006, I had one client that was just more and more and more and more and more. And they ended up representing somewhat like 80% of the book of business.
Wow.
And then that person left the company. And the new person that came in said, thank you, no, thank you. I don't need your services. And that was my rude introduction to client concentration. And it very nearly, that was a lot of sleepless nights. That was a tremendous amount of stress on me, on my wife, on the company. So if the client is asking for more and more and more, which is a good thing, means that you're delivering. The way I want you to reframe that is you've got a certain degree of pricing power that's being created there. So as a company wants more, you can structure your deals so that you say, listen, you have to, this is a 6-month minimum. I need 3 months before you cancel the contract. You're going to, whether or not you use the time or not, there's a minimum bill that you're going to pay every month. So for example, we had one client that was looming to become a top 10. And by the way, it's always top 10 that I worry about. Like I try to break it in, who are my top 10, who are my top 20, and then you have this tail.
Right.
And Perry Marshall talks about the 80-20 rule, and he's absolutely right. But if you look at your top 10, we always want to try and structure it so that there was a minimum fee that they'd have to pay, whether they use the time or not. They'd have to pay that minimum.
Right.
And what it did was it incentivized them to use the time. It also made that I had a certain cash flow. And when you have a certain cash flow that you can count on for a certain amount of time, it enables you to hire.
Right.
Right. And so that's the key thing, is that you want to hire more, and then you want to put some money into sales so you can grow more of these other clients.
Yeah. Great advice. I do want to get into the acquisition of Dentsu to your company, but before doing that, you talked about that you decided to go kind of all in or go big on the Google platform. So the kind of Google marketing platform, analytics platform. To some, that sounds very exciting, right? To be kind of at the leading edge, to be the top company reselling this. There's a lot that can come with that. But it seems like that could also be in some ways a little bit risky, or there could be some potential downsides to that. And I'm interested to know, how do you think about that? Because there are many, especially today, many different analytics tools that companies, your prospective clients may want to use. And if you are kind of dedicated to really pushing and getting the most out of Google, how do you think about that? How do you position that? How do you still go out and win business when the companies that you may want to win business from are using another analytics tool, or just want to bring in some other analytics tools that aren't part of your core? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah. So here's the thing, okay, Michael. The danger of any company is to try to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
Period. If you like what I said, because at CP, at Cardinal Path, I would get emails and outreach almost daily. We want to be a partner. We want to be a partner. We want to be a partner. And my answer to that is fewer and deeper, right? I want fewer, deeper partnerships. And by deeper, I mean, all right, I am willing to invest in this partnership by getting my staff certified, and training them up and them getting them certified, by really understanding what the value proposition is and building some really strong sales material on that. But I need you to help me get my staff certified. So to invest in that certification training, I need you to invest in the go-to-market strategy. I want to see how you're supporting me as a potential partner. And if I don't have clarity around that, it's just not going to happen. So first of all, is your partner willing to invest? Secondly, is your partner willing to bring you leads? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're not willing to bring you leads, and there's not clarity and just hands on the table around that reality, then kind of no. So when you start using that as a filter, it starts to narrow down the potential partners. The other one is that it never hurts to go with a market leader, as far as I'm concerned. And certainly Google was one. We were also an Adobe partner for many years, and we let Adobe go when we made the decision to really focus in on Google. Like there's no shortage of other tools out there.
Right.
You have to pick the horse.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful point. I'm a big believer in less is more, and that when you tend to, you mentioned Perry Marshall, and I've studied Richard Koch's work as well. This whole idea of the complexity doesn't scale, right, is so powerful. You mentioned one point there around the partnership, which I think would be helpful for people to clarify, which is that in the case of Google, or kind of the core partner, that there's an expectation around leads, that if you're going to really invest into them and represent them and sell their product in the market, that you're kind of expecting, it sounded like, I just wanted to clarify, that Google would send you a certain amount of leads. Is that a written kind of expectation that, hey, this is what we expect, this number of leads from you monthly, annually? Or can you kind of give some clarity into how you set the expectations around lead flow coming from that partner?
Yeah, well, so to be clear, things have evolved a lot since we started partnering. So in the early days, there was a lot of lead flow from Google, but Google doesn't do that anymore. So we understand why, and that's okay. But the thing which I'm really looking for is, what's our go-to-market together, right? So what's our joint marketing plan? And what are you going to invest in to help us, achieve those sales targets? And let's hold ourselves really accountable to those sales targets. The other thing is, you want to make sure that your partner doesn't have if you're doing the services, isn't and has no intention of building a service, a consulting arm, because that definitely means they're going to need to work with service partners. So, that's a super important one. But yeah, you need to be, if they might say no, that's okay.
Right.
But the most important thing is clarity.
Right. Yeah.
I just need to know where I stand.
All right, so let's now kind of, I'm going to say fast forward in the story a little bit, but we're going back in time still for you, which is around the acquisition. So Dentsu, this global conglomerate that owns hundreds of different brands, and you mentioned they've kind of consolidated down more recently when we spoke before recording. But 2016 they acquired Cardinal Path.
Correct.
The two questions that I have for you on this, Alex, are, looking back, are there certain things that you did that you feel contributed most to the success that Cardinal Path had, that ultimately made Dentsu interested in acquiring the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So the general rule of thumb is 20-20. right? 20% revenue growth, 20% EBITDA. So
Mm,
you want to see your top line revenue grow at 20% a year, and you want 3 years of that at a minimum. And then you want to see that 20% drop into the bottom line or more, right?
right.
So anybody that's going to buy you is looking for what's your potential earnings growth and, what's your margin against that. So those, if you can't get those two things and for 3 years, then unless you're in a super hot space, it's going to be harder to sell, particularly if you're a consulting services business. So 20 on the top, 20 on the bottom. It helps to have a really strong brand, right? So in our case, we pushed really hard on the brand and our association with Google, which put us onto their radar and enabled us to say things like the world's largest reseller of, at the time was called Google Premium and then Google 360, G360. We won a couple of awards, and so that helped as well. But the big thing was that we wanted to demonstrate that the financials were where they wanted to be, that we were in a market that was growing, right? And that we had a skill set that was great, and that the senior leadership team, not just the owners, but the leadership team were really top notch, because that's what they're buying. If it's a consulting services company, they're buying the people. And so the ability to create the forward revenues that you expect from the historical revenues are tied to the people and what they're capable of doing. And so that's where the deal structure becomes really, really important.
How many years or how much kind of time passed from when you started to think about selling the business? Like, were you preparing the financials and working on
Yes.
to get the 2020, like 3 years in advance or 2 years or a year? Like how far in advance were you actually preparing the business to potentially sell?
Right. So we formed Cardinal Path, I believe, on March 8th, 2011. And I think we sold it on March 10th, 2016. And when we came together, we had this kind of fuzzy, gauzy idea that we were going to build something of value and sell it in 5 years.
Wow.
That was what we said we're going to do. And it's like, oh my God, we sold it in 5 years,
Right.
So that was the plan when we brought the company together. And, the first couple of years were hard because we had to align cultures, we had to align systems, we had to align approaches. We cycled through a couple of salespeople and sales leads and marketing leads. But once we started to, and, we had to get a CFO. And I will say to you that one of the most important things you can ever do is get yourself a CFO. And Greg Dos Santos was our CFO that was brought in early on. And instrumental in giving us the financial discipline and rigor that is absolutely required, because when you are putting yourself out to acquisition and they start doing their due diligence and they're going through the books, if your books are not super clean, right, you're just going to be taking points off the deal.
Right.
So super clean books really, really matter. And so, we started to structure the business by layering in the operational stuff to make it clear that anybody that was buying us, that we had built for scale. So you said earlier on, complexity doesn't scale. So we reduced the number of partners. We focused in on Google. We built systems. I mean, the very first value at Cardinal Path is that process set strategy free. If you've got process in place, then strategy can kind of do what it needs to do, and then you can build against that. But you need process. So we were very process focused because we want to scale.
Right.
And I can tell you that, we were bought at a certain price point. By the time we finished the earnout 4 years later, we had, basically our revenues were, 15, 20 times higher. Right. So we really pushed that hard. And but going back to the sales, so 20 on the top, 20 on the bottom, systems in place, the right team, because they're buying a management team. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And so the other side of my question around the acquisition is, since now you've gone through it, you've passed the 4 years of earnout. Looking back in kind of in hindsight, is there anything that you would do differently around the sale? Is there anything that if somebody was also looking to sell their consulting business, you'd say, hey, make sure you're careful about this or careful about this when it comes to deal structures or earnouts?
Yeah. So going back to why I want to talk about Greg for a sec was because one of the things that Greg did was made sure that things were set up to make it easier to sell. Right.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of levers that you can pull there. Right.
Mhm.
So, and the thing about it is that if you're planning on selling, the first thing they're going to do is look at the books. And if you did any hanky panky in the last year or two with the books or any kind of like things that are a little like shifting dollars here, they're going to see that, and it's going to erode their trust in your management. Right.
Right.
So what he did was he really started to structure everything really well. And we were doing a lot of training. We had a very big training line of business. And one of the things that he said was, like, let's move the training line of business into a marketing expense, which shifted everything. And, was really an important kind of, which was completely justifiable, by the way, because we used that to drive a lot of leads. But it was really an important shift from a book's perspective because it made the books look that much better.
Right.
So, but if we had done that like the year before we wanted to sell the company, it would not have been so good, kind of thing.
I want to ask just a couple final questions here before wrapping up, and I really appreciate all this, Alex. So today, I mean, you are global lead for Dentsu around the area of analytics and so forth that you manage.
Or Google,
Yeah,
Google.
Google. Thank you. So I can guess that you have a pretty demanding schedule. You're busy. You have a lot of things going on.
Yep.
How do you think about getting a lot done, but still being present for your family? I know you have two sons, right?
Yep.
You have a lot going on. So just from your experience, with everything that you've gone through, are there any kind of principles that have allowed you to achieve, whether you want to call it balance or just for you the right kind of lifestyle in comparison to time on business?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that super honestly here. So I was diagnosed with adult ADHD about 6 months ago, and so it's been a huge unlock in my life because I always found it difficult to put boundaries, and I always found it difficult to, because I would just get sucked into something, or it would take forever to get something going. I'd bounce around. So I developed this habit of, and there's a great book called Tiny Habits that you can pick up, and another one called Faster, Better, Smarter by Charles Duhigg as well.
Right.
But essentially the idea is that you have to own your schedule. You have to own your schedule. You can't let anybody book on top and just take, because what will happen is your day will get frittered away with stuff. So if you ever were to look at my schedule, I've got blocks in there, 2 to 3 hour blocks almost every day called focus time, which is where I use that to just focus in on a problem, because you can't focus if only you have like these half hours here or there. So that's one thing. Manage your schedule. Secondly, urgent and important, right? So if you open up my book, where is it? I don't have it handy because I came to a different place, but in my little notebook, every day at the top of it is marked important and urgent. And it goes into one of those two columns. If it doesn't go into one of those two columns, I don't do it. It gets delegated.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's either it's urgent, which I'm going to do, or it's important, I'm still going to do it, but maybe not as quickly. And if it's not there, somebody else is doing it. So delegation becomes super important, and you have to have that discipline. The other thing, which I guess I was largely, I don't know if I was super successful. You should ask my wife about it. But I'm very, very, very blessed that I have a fantastic relationship with my wife, and who's a partner and who took on a lot of the stuff so that I could go build a company. I think having that type of partnership was really important. At the same time, I tried to keep, I never send emails on weekends to staff. Never, because I want them to know that their weekends are theirs. I tried to never send emails at night, because I want them to know that their nights are theirs. We need that downtime. If we're going to perform at our best, an elite athlete, if hockey, I grew up in hockey, they are off on the ice and they're off and they rest, and they're on and they're off. You need that rest, cognitively, physically, emotionally, you need it. So managing those kinds of boundaries is super important. I won't say that I was super great at it, but I worked really hard at it.
Just a question that I'm fascinated to hear your perspective on, and then we'll wrap up, is you've achieved the success. So you've built now these multiple companies, you've had them acquired. I would imagine that there was a nice financial outcome from that. Looking back, so often entrepreneurs we see this destination, we want to make a bunch of money or whatever, accomplish whatever we want to accomplish. And so often the focus is on like the destination, not on the journey. When you kind of, again, look back, having accomplished what you have accomplished, because here you are today. I mean, you're still working at Dentsu. You're past your earnout. You could be sitting on a beach or doing probably, whatever you want, but you're still doing. So anything that you kind of think about, like, oh yeah, I could have maybe approached a little bit differently, or just thought about the journey, or maybe I shouldn't have worked as hard. Any thoughts around that you feel might benefit others, and just kind of being able to tap into your experience?
Oh, wow. I love this question. So the greatest gift I've been given, other than the birth of my children, is my brother, who is my idol, giving me the gift of meditation, and or introducing me to meditation. And it's kind of been something very fundamental for me. And why I bring this up is because if you look at the hedonistic treadmill, right, or they call it the hedonic treadmill, which is people that win the $1 million in like they think, if I win the lottery, I'll be happy. And then they win the lottery and they go up in the happiness curve, and then they go right back down to where they were before. It's this idea that we have a happiness set point, right? And the highs of happiness are always faster and shorter lived than the lows of depression or sadness. Because as humans, we overweight the negative and we underweight the positive, right? It's our inner critic at play. So the hedonic treadmill is that we always think that happiness is if I get that car, or if I get that house, or if I get that job, or if I make that money, or what have you. That's the hedonic treadmill. And honestly, I was so focused on the destination that I didn't enjoy the journey as much as I should have. Right. I always felt we were on the edge of disaster and the brink of greatness. Right. So, those two things can't be true at the same time. So, I kind of wish that I had a little bit more belief that it would all work out. Because I would have enjoyed the journey a little bit more. On the other side of it, what I will say is that, I find myself to be very fortunate. Things worked out spectacularly well, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. At the same time, now, instead of that sense of being pushed to make things happen, now I feel really drawn to what I can do, right? So I think that when we're on one side of that event, right, we feel pushed all the time. And it's hard to feel pushed all the time. Right. It's mentally wearing. So what I would say is, be kind to yourself, and know that there are very, very few people that actually are the hunter-gatherers of today that actually eat what they kill. And that if you've been in business and you've been in business successfully, and by that, I mean, that at the end of the day, there's more in the kitty than what you had to take out to run the business, and you've been doing that for 3 or more years, then give yourself a big ass pat on the back, because there's very, very, very few people that do that. I mean, what is it? 80% of most businesses fail after 3 years, before 3 years. And the other thing is, take a moment to step back and ask yourself, is this still the right pathway, in the sense of, should I look at merging with another entity? Should I think about something differently? Because we tend to just keep on keeping on. It's not bad, but it's hard when you're on that treadmill to get that perspective. The reason I'm still working, one, it's COVID, so you can't really travel and do that other stuff. Two is that I feel really drawn. There's a huge challenge that I want to take on here, and that I feel drawn towards that. And three is, it's the ability to work without the stress of, if things go south. So it's just now it's really for enjoyment. And purely so. So in that sense, it's all the skills that are in the tool set that I built up over years, which I'm now able to play with.
Fantastic. Alex, I want to thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us here today. Really appreciate everything that you've shared, and kind of giving us a glimpse into aspects of your journey. I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and your work and everything that you have going on. Where's the best place for people to go and learn more?
Well, my LinkedIn profile now, I'm going to start to publish a lot more to that profile. You can follow me on Twitter at A Langshur, and my LinkedIn profile is Alex Langshur. And for your listeners, first, we're going to be launching a site within the Dentsu framework that's going to be focused on Google, and I'll be doing a lot of thought leadership on that space too. I also do a lot of business coaching, so if you're interested in that, I'm more than happy to help out on that. I've got a number of clients which I'm working with, and so you could just reach out to me through LinkedIn, and I'll respond.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Michael, for the opportunity to do so.